Salutations everybody, it is Matty here today and we need to have a chat about Square Enix. This is a company I personally care a lot about. They've put out a lot of products that I personally enjoyed, so I want to talk about whether or not this is a company that's in trouble. A lot of this conversation is sparking from Final Fantasy 15, seemingly a platform that was generating a lot of revenue for Square Enix as they kept putting more and more content into it. They even partnered with Assassin's Creed with this game. It seemed like all was going well until there was a special showcase which fans thought we'd get more DLC and information on the game from, and in turn Square Enix announced that there's no more coming, that a lot of the DLC got canceled, and they also posted a $33 million loss. So I started doing some research on all recent Square Enix projects, trying to add up whether or not this company's been in trouble for a long while or not. So I want to start off by taking a look at their past E3 showcase. I think a lot of hopes were high for folks because Square Enix had a lot on the table for people like Dragon Quest XI, Shadow of the Tomb Raider, Just Cause, Kingdom Hearts, more Final Fantasy DLC, just to name a few things. Life is Strange 2, can't forget that. Square Enix had a lot coming our way, so folks were expecting a big showcase and them to join the ranks of maybe like a Bethesda, another third-party publisher that is established in the E3 game, as a press conference worth watching. But instead it was about half an hour, 40 minutes long. It felt rushed. It looked very low budget and thrown together. One thing we've learned recently about E3 with Sony pulling out is that this is a very expensive showcase that you can't just go willy-nilly into. I imagine that $33 million loss didn't just sneak up on Square Enix and was there for a while. Hence, that would solidify why this showcase was so low budget. They couldn't invest more resources than that because they were already in the process of losing a ton of money and hoping to maybe make it back with some of these titles. I think the biggest issue with Square Enix boils down to management. We've seen recently a lot of projects announced from them that just get very complicated. The biggest highlights, of course, were Final Fantasy Versus 13, which turned into Final Fantasy 15, and then Kingdom Hearts 3, which I can't believe it's real, man. It looks like it's actually happening. It just may come out this coming January. On top of that, there's also the Final Fantasy VII Remake, which is apparently going to receive PR priority after Kingdom Hearts 3 launches this January. Each one of these games has something in common. They were all announced way ahead of time, and then we don't know this about Kingdom Hearts 3 or of course Final Fantasy VII Remake yet, but with Final Fantasy 15, it came out and had good reviews. It seemed to be a platform that Square Enix was willing to invest in, but it ended up costing them a ton of money and a lot of losses. That was partially due to the Luminous engine, which was a big issue for Square Enix, but I digress. All of this culminates to one large loss. These AAA products aren't cheap to market. For example, Square Enix informed us that Shadow of the Tomb Raider cost $100 million to make and $35 million to market. Tomb Raider is a large IP, and even with all that money invested in this product, it sold way less than its 2013 reboot. Granted, there was a difference in retail versus digital. Digital is starting to outgrow the physical sales, so there is a little bit of give in those stats, but much like with Fallout 76, the percentage is so large it clearly indicates that sales for this game weren't all that good and performed below expectations, just underselling Rise of the Tomb Raider, which was exclusive to a console for a very long time. So clearly Shadow of the Tomb Raider isn't really raking in the dough for Square Enix, and that's even with a big roadmap release before launch indicating a lot of DLC coming to this game, where not only were you maybe getting the bang for your buck with the initial package, but you were going to get a ton of content to invest in later down the line. On the good news side of things, Square Enix has two things to look forward to. Number one is Just Cause 4, which maybe could sell well, bring in some revenue. I'm not too sure how lucrative of an IP this is, but I feel Kingdom Hearts 3 is going to be the IP that really brings in a lot of money. It's a game that's so easy to sell at face value. It looks fun, and it's Disney. That is something I think most gamers can get into. The story, on the other hand, really tough sell even as a huge Kingdom Hearts fan myself. There is another part of good news, which is that Dragon Quest XI has sold really well despite launching in the month with Spider-Man on PS4, which was one of the best-selling games of this year. Dragon Quest XI launch sales were more than double the previous series record holder and reportedly has hit upwards of 3 million at its launch week, which that is just so good, especially for a JRPG that is more traditional and less of a Western focus, kind of like Final Fantasy 15 was. really good numbers for that. So that's good for Square Enix. But then the bad news continues. Life is Strange 2, which is the sequel that was long awaited for a lot of Life is Strange fans with the first game. Between that was Before the Storm, a prequel to the first Life is Strange game. According to Reset Era, Life is Strange 2 debuted with a quarter the Steam player concurrency of Life is Strange Before the Storm. Once again, just very underwhelming numbers for a product that Square invested in. And if you think on top of that they made a completely free episode, The Awesome Adventures of Captain Spirit, now this likely shocked Square Enix because the first Life is Strange hit 3 million sales, which, as I indicated with Dragon Quest, that's a good number of sales for a product like this, especially then and more so now in a day and age where episodic gaming isn't as profitable as it once was. We saw what happened with Telltale. It really took the industry by storm, and we saw that episodic games struggle even with the best, biggest brands to make good money. Now, does this mixture of mostly bad news with some good sprinkled in mean Square Enix is in trouble? I think not. I think with the cancellation of Final Fantasy 15, the imminent release of Kingdom Hearts 3, as well as Just Cause 4, and it seems like nothing else on the horizon outside of Final Fantasy 7 Remake, which is dropping within the next 3 years, according to Square Enix in 2017. I feel like they're setting their sights on the next generation. I don't think they're in the best spot right now where they have a lot of money, and the way this is solidified is by a LinkedIn profile. As we can see at the top of a profile for a 3D character model lead artist at Luminous Productions, they are working on a new AAA title for the PS5, which, with some additional insight from Square Enix when there was an announcement of the cancellation of Final Fantasy 15's DLC, might give us a better picture of what's happening. Allow me to provide some additional insight into what we mean by a directional change for the company. A new company called Luminous Productions was formed centered around the staff who had previously been developing the main game as part of Business Division 2, and have continued to work on the project since the main purpose of establishing Luminous Productions was to create a studio that can deliver a completely new AAA title into the global market. And due to the directional change, the company has decided to focus our resources on the development of the AAA title. This resulted in the decision to cancel the production of 3 out of the 4 DLCs originally planned and introduced. So big thanks to the Gamers Joint for that information. At face value, I think it looks like Square isn't really doing that well, but when you really break it down and look at that quote there combined with some of the moves, and then we see the LinkedIn profile, it seems like Square is getting the money they can now from their intellectual properties, but what they're really doing is gearing up for the next generation of gamers and trying to hit a home run there, investing their assets and their money in that, because it seems like there's been some missteps here and they've lost a lot of money. They're essentially cutting their losses, if anything, and trying to make their money back down the road instead of investing it in stuff now that's really not generating them anything, clearly. As I continue to ponder upon the subject of product management within Square Enix, I have some additional thoughts I want to toss your way. It starts out with Final Fantasy, which I believe is the biggest brand underneath the Square Enix umbrella. There have been some questionable decisions with this brand as time has gone on when I look at the bigger picture. I'd say it begins with Final Fantasy 13, where it was not as much what fans wanted it to be, and so Square Enix continuously made sequels for that part of the series instead of just moving on. And then you think of something along the lines of Final Fantasy 14, which was a train wreck upon announcement and launch until there was a Realm Reborn, and now it is one of the more popular MMOs out there and one of the most enjoyable ones for folks. But it didn't start off hot, and I'm sure it hurt Square Enix to pretty much rebuild the game from the ground up. Couple that in with Final Fantasy 15, which clearly didn't profit Square Enix for so many years of development as they continuously tried to make their money back by investing more and more in it. And it almost gives this image that the classics are the best way to go, that the most exciting thing about this franchise is the remake of 7 or the re-release of classics on the Switch, on Xbox, bringing back Final Fantasy X and X-2, bringing back Final Fantasy 12. That's when I hear the most positive buzz, and the best sales for Square Enix is when it comes to re-releasing these older games, but any new attempts of Final Fantasy haven't really gone over all too well outside of the initial release of Final Fantasy 15. I imagine that Final Fantasy 14 is doing well because they recently announced another expansion for that game, so it seems things are going swimmingly over in that ballpark of the Final Fantasy realm. So hopefully this provides some clarity on the situation with Square Enix. I don't think they're in the best spot, but I don't think they're necessarily going down under and failing as a company and they're going to go bankrupt soon. Anyway, I'd love to hear your thoughts on all of this in the comments down below, so do fire away, ladies and gentlemen. Other than that, Please follow me on Twitter, like me on Facebook. Those links are in the description down below, along with my Patreon. Do consider supporting that as it fuels all the content I create here. Stay sexy, stay active. I love you all. Peace.